This address is 1 Vegemite Way, and there's a bit of a hint about what's happening behind me. This building is an important piece of Australian culture. Now you're watching this, whereas I can stand here and smell what's coming out of this building. And that smell is so important, it's been put on the Heritage Register. But does that mean we have to keep this factory forever? This is the challenge of heritage, preserving things for future generations. And if you look back at old photos and videos of Australian cities, you'll see remarkable buildings that have been destroyed, never to be seen again. How do we preserve what matters for us? And how do we evolve and develop for the needs of today? I'm in Brunswick, an inner city suburb, and the site of one of the many heritage versus housing debates happening across the country. This building has recently been used as a tyre and car service centre, but its history actually goes back a lot further. From 1887 through to 1936, this building was part of Melbourne's tram network. Now at the time, this was when cable trams were being used. Essentially in here would be a coal-powered steam engine, and what that would do is pull underground cables and move the trams through their routes. Eventually trams were electrified and buildings like this were decommissioned. This was one of 17 across the network, no longer needed and no longer in use. So this building is on the Victorian Heritage Register, being recognised for part of this historic transport network. But what do we do with the building from now? There's been a proposal to turn this into over 100 apartments, mostly for students, with a gym and a ground floor cafe. So that's the tension, preserving a piece of Melbourne's transport history or 100 new homes. Every once in a while, there's a heritage listing which raises some eyebrows and even makes the news, with people wondering, is this in the community's interest? That happened right here with this. This is a 7-storey 1970s era car park. The Heritage Review described it as striking, robust and bold, as an excellent example of brutalist architecture. But nearby residents put in their own submissions, arguing that protecting a car park is like protecting a cigarette factory, and it will add to pollution in an area which doesn't need cars. Well, members of the council were quick to say when the listing occurred that new things could get put on this site, but with this listing, it does make it more challenging. There are some buildings which are so significant that almost all Australians would agree they deserve protection. Think about the Sydney Opera House, Parliament House, and the Shrine of Remembrance here in Melbourne. Now, the Shrine of Remembrance is a war memorial, one of the biggest of its kind. And in this case, the heritage protection goes beyond the building itself. You see, the Shrine of Remembrance was designed in a way so that it would be visible down the main street of Melbourne, Swanston Street. So to define that vista, they've installed this little plaque, unnoticed by thousands of people that walk past it every day, outlining the area where the shrine should be visible. Getting the smell of Vegemite, noted for its importance, took a bit of a process, and in fact it was rejected the first time because there was concern it would stop potential redevelopment in this industrial area. But when it was passed, it was acknowledged, but not at the highest level of significance. And in fact, the council was pretty quick to point out that didn't mean you could never change this site, but rather any future developments should note and acknowledge and in some way celebrate this amazing smell. When you look at historic buildings, you might see some that you think should have obviously been retained, but it's not always that simple. For example, this beautiful colonial mutual life building, which was demolished in the 1960s. This building has 7 floors with huge tall ceilings. While it looks stunning, there's no doubt there are severe limitations. Big rooms with cold, hard surfaces that are incredibly difficult to heat. It certainly wasn't compliant with modern disability and accessibility standards, and with fewer rooms and less space for a building of similar size, this was a white elephant and not financially viable. So the question remains, if it was going to be retained, for who and for what purpose? One of the challenges when it comes to heritage is not just what to keep, but how much of it. This is a particular challenge when it comes to industrial heritage, where there could be a lot of iterations of a similar important piece of Australia's history. For example, in this one council area, there are 14 electrical substations, all on the Heritage Register. So when it came to this particular development, the proposal was to demolish the Heritage Substation and replace it with 333 apartments. This design was knocked back, and instead the Heritage Substation was kept and the number of apartments dropped down to 168. There are people that criticise the overuse of heritage, arguing that it makes development more expensive and housing less affordable, and in particular the concern of blanket heritage restriction. One of the real challenges here is that the oldest parts of Australian cities are the most central areas because that's how the city was built, from the inside out. What that means, though, are these areas most covered in heritage protections are some of the most desirable to live in and best connected to different services. Is this a binary choice? Do we preserve things as part of heritage or demolish them and have nothing? Or is there perhaps a middle ground? If there's one phrase that gets people worked up in this world, it's the idea of facadism. Now, facadism is essentially preserving the outside of a building or replacing all of the inside. What you might see, for example, is the external part of a corner pub, and there'd be a skyscraper hidden behind it. Now, this is not something which is recognised and beloved by a lot of people. The concern is that it's really an unhappy compromise between heritage and development. But it is debated. Some people argue that if the building was going to be demolished anyway, it's a good way to capture some of the history and some of the character without all of it being lost. Now, there has been some reports on this and some people arguing that it's not the ideal way, and instead you should try to capture as much of the important cultural fabric of the building as possible, and that may be preserving more than just the outside. But there are examples of it across Australia, and once you've got your eyes out for it, you're sure to see it. Are there other ways we can preserve heritage for buildings which get demolished? This is Melbourne Connect, and it's part of an innovation precinct within the University of Melbourne. So you'll find researchers, startups, and a science-themed museum here. Now, this is the site of the former Royal Women's Hospital. Now, the original plan was to keep the building, but for various technical reasons, that wasn't possible. So to try to recognise this important site, bricks from the previous building were used in construction here. There's different types of digital storytelling and screens on site, but my favourite is this recognition of the former footprint of this building. Here's a cool example of preserving some history even if the building is demolished. These Atlas figures are a pretty grand, imposing entrance to what was the Colonial Bank of Australasia building. That was built in 1880 and demolished in 1932. But as you can see, they preserved that entrance and have installed it here at the University of Melbourne. There are examples of buildings being preserved in their entirety, like this Victorian townhouse being preserved as part of a much larger development. So what was the result with this building? Well, it turns out heritage was just part of the decision-making process. In the application for this, there were 22 responses from local residents, raising kind of a lot of the normal concerns about noise, car parking, and overshadowing. In the end, this was approved with amendments, so apartments are coming to this site. But the debate of heritage versus housing is far from over, and there'll be a lot more of these discussions happening across the country. In the end, heritage is just one piece of Australia's complex housing puzzle.